This week's thought for the weekend is, fear is more dangerous than evil. So the basic idea, I believe, that there are evil people in the world, but I don't think there are very many truly evil people in the world. Now, the ones that are there, do a fair amount of damage, get a lot of attention. But I think overall, more damage is caused by people who are afraid than by people who are evil, for a bunch of reasons. First, people who are afraid will do things that they know in their heart is wrong, and they will do them anyway because they're afraid. For example, cheating. Cheating typically happens in a class because it's the night before an assignment is due, and you panic and you think the world is going to come to an end if you don't get this assignment turned in on time. Fear overwhelms your common sense, and then you cheat. Not because you're a bad person, you were just afraid and made a bad decision. Or when people are afraid, they behave irrationally, and that makes them unpredictable and really dangerous. So for example, most of you weren't sort of conscious at this time, but after the 9/11 attacks happened, everybody in the US was so terrified about future terror attacks that they were happy for Congress to pass a whole bunch of bills that sacrificed privacy of individuals in ways that just were unnecessary and went way beyond what was needed. Just did really stupid decisions because they were so afraid about terrorist attacks. Or fear makes people underachieve. So because if you're afraid to try something new, for example, you get stuck in a rut, miss opportunities to do new things. I talked about this a little bit last week. Or when people have had really bad relationships, sometimes they become so afraid of having another bad relationship that it becomes difficult for them to actually form a good relationship. Or people are afraid of looking bad, and so when they make mistakes, they're afraid to admit them, don't want to look bad, which means it's hard to learn from them, which means they tend to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So fear really causes people to underachieve. And then lastly, when there is evil, there's almost always fear as well. It's right there together with evil. So for example, sociopaths, they're typically driven by fear, typically loss of control. And so acts like murder and rape are often attempts to regain control, so to deal with their fear of loss of control. Or fear is the engine of evil. One evil person, they can't do much by themselves. How do you get a lot of people to help you out in your evil endeavor? You make them afraid. And so the way evil people work is they instill fear in many other people and get them to do all the truly evil work. So I think fear is much more pervasive than evil. I think it happens at many different levels. I think it affects almost everybody to some degree. I know in my life I've made bad decisions because I was afraid. And I suspect if you look into your heart, you probably can think of cases where you have also. On the other hand, fear does serve a pretty important biological purpose. If you're about to get attacked by a wild animal or about to get hit by a car, being afraid is probably a good thing. It can help to save your life. And sometimes it's unavoidable. Like stage fright. If you want to give a talk at a big conference, you're likely to feel pretty nervous when you get up on stage. Or if you take risks, sometimes you want to take risks to do things, and that can be scary. And so sometimes fear is something you have to live with. But I think it also happens in a lot of situations where it's not helpful, just causes problems. So the question is, how do you keep fear from damaging your life? I have 3 suggestions. First one is just awareness. Ask yourself, am I making this decision because I'm afraid? Would I make a different decision if I wasn't afraid? If that happens, then you should think about making changes, like change the decision. Or if you're in an environment where you're constantly feeling afraid, then get out of that environment. Whatever it takes, just get out of that environment and change the situation. Second thing is prevention approaches. Because the opposite of fear is confidence, which I think comes from power. So try and make yourself powerful. And by power, I mean ability and competence. Think Albert Einstein or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, not like dominance over others as Stalin or Big Brother. So the best way to prevent fear, I think, is to learn and develop. Just develop your skill set. And when we were raising our kids, our 2 daughters, one of the most important things I wanted to do in raising our daughters was to give them this sense of empowerment, to teach them skills that would give them this deep-set confidence. And by the way, I suggest this to you when you become parents. Try and find a way to put your kids in situations where they can feel their power. It's not just telling them they're doing great, but of course do that too, but in situations where they can just see for themselves, I did this really awesome thing, and I feel powerful. You want to teach people to have this sense of confidence that will allow them to deal with situations without being afraid and making bad decisions. And then the third approach is to harness the fear, which you can do in some situations. You can recognize it, work through it, potentially even feed off of fear. So a personal example for me is stage fright. I still get stage fright when I'm giving, not so much in classes anymore, but when I'm giving a talk in front of a big audience, I often get stage fright. I'll get up on stage, and the symptoms are everything seems like it's going really fast. I feel like I can't breathe, hardly talk. It's like everybody in the audience must know that I'm panting, and I'm just so nervous. But I eventually realized that this only lasts about 30 seconds or a minute, and then adrenaline kicks in. And adrenaline is a really great drug. It's a really great drug. And I would notice that once the adrenaline hits, that everything calms down. And I get this incredible sense of power and control, and everything is easy and smooth. And so now I actually kind of like getting the stage fright because I know I'm going to get that hit of adrenaline in about 30 seconds or a minute. So just feed off of it and use it to your advantage. So 3 approaches again: awareness, prevention, and harnessing when you can. Bottom line, don't let your life be damaged by fear. Try and figure out a way to not let that happen, and also see if you can help the people around you to find a place where they're not doing things because they're afraid. One closing thought: I think if we want a world at peace, we need a world without fear. So have a great weekend, and see you Monday.